Hi everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar organised by myself, Catherine Bloxham at VR Intelligence. We've got some great panelists today from across the XR ecosystem, and they're discussing the state of immersive hardware and content, current limitations and future potential. So I've been doing a lot of research calls with people from across the industry, and this topic emerged as a key area of interest. So I hope you enjoy the discussion. Our discussion today is in the lead up to the 2019 VRX Europe conference taking place in Amsterdam on the 10th and 11th of April next year. So don't miss out on your exclusive webinar discount, WebR1, which you can see at the bottom of the slide, and that will get you 10%, even more money off the early bird ticket rate. So now I'm going to hand over to our chair for today, who's Mr. Sol Rogers, the founder and CEO of Rewind, which is an Emmy Award-nominated immersive content studio based in the UK. So thank you, Sol. Over to you.
Thank you very much for letting me hold the reins. I'm being brought in last minute to moderate this webinar from the wonderful Amy Peck, who can't make it because she's somewhere mid-flight, somewhere over the Atlantic. And so what we're going to be doing today is we've got Patrick, who's the CEO of nDreams. We've got Simon Benson from Realized Realities, who's ex-Sony, and the wonderful Cecile, who's the BD manager for virtual reality for HP. And we're going to be covering four main topics. I'm sure we'll end up in some other ones, but let's see where we start. So we're going to be talking about what do we think the main hardware challenges are out there and how can they be fixed? How are manufacturers going to address user experience and user experience challenges? Where's the content coming from? What's getting the biggest consumer and enterprise attention across the market? And what is really needed for the XR and immersive market to really go mainstream? But maybe let's start off. Patrick, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit and talk about what nDreams does?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Patrick O'Lunig. I'm the CEO and founder of nDreams. We've been working exclusively in VR since 2013. We're a UK-based VR developer and publisher, about 60 people at the moment, and we're growing pretty quickly currently. We're mainly focused on sort of big, high-end AAA VR games. We're doing big games for high-end VR headsets, including headsets like the Oculus Quest. But we're also doing some work with VR location-based entertainment and arcades and building games and experiences for those as well at the moment.
Awesome. Similarly, Simon? Simon, do you want to introduce yourself? Maybe take yourself off mute. And until Simon comes off mute, let's jump to Cecile. Do you want to introduce yourself and talk a bit about HP?
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Sol, and thank you to inviting us to this nice webinar. So my name is Cécile Tesna-Dumoncel. I'm a business manager for VR in Europe for HP. So HP, you may know us. So it's one of the first companies that built out what Silicon Valley become. So it was 80 years ago. Our first customer was Disney. And ever since, HP has always been focused on inventing and reinventing the technology for the future. So I'm coming here to talk specifically on XR, and because we see VR and immersive computing as the future of computing. Very important for us and very important for our commercial customers. So we are launching a full VR portfolio. So happy to be with you in this discussion.
Simon's back now. After that, I was stuck on mute. I'm back with you. So yeah, so going back to my introduction, so my name is Simon Benson, and I'm the co-founder of Realized Realities, which is a specialist virtual reality and immersive technologies consultancy. Before that, I think you mentioned, I used to work for Sony as their director of immersive tech, and I was instrumental in bringing technology such as 3D gaming, and also was one of the founder members of virtual reality. So PlayStation VR was one of my baby technologies, if you like. So I was instrumental in bringing that and worked on all aspects. So not just the content and the software and the user experience, but also the hardware itself. And I have about 50 technology patents in my name relating to immersive tech and things like that. So I do a lot of inventing as well.
Excellent. So a nice group. So yeah, I think let's just jump in with the kind of top question, which and the discussion point, which is what are the main hardware challenges that are trying to be solved, and are they being solved? Maybe maybe a good place to start from Patrick's point of view, as similarly to you, we are using technology to build these things, and so we're bumping into some of the challenges day in, day out. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of challenges at the moment. VR hardware really is still in its infancy. I think for me the big things are wires and going wireless, which is clearly being solved with some of the new headsets being announced and coming out. It's definitely the way that the headset technology is going. Control with fixed DOV movement and hand tracking and full kind of moving around with inside out tracking, I think is really necessary, and we're starting to see those come into headsets as well. I think there's a big user experience challenge because of the hardware, which is part of the hardware limitation, which is that VR headsets aren't quick enough to set up. You really want to be able to get into a game, get into a VR app within 10 seconds when you decide you want to use VR. And at the moment, that's still a challenge. It's getting better, but it's still a way to go. Form factor and weight are clearly an issue still. I think we need new display technology. There's definitely lots of exciting work happening in that space. I think it will come. But we're still, headsets are still a little bit bulky, still a little bit awkward. Battery life, and also little stupid things like being compatible with glasses. Just making sure it's really comfortable for people who wear glasses and haven't got perfect sight. So there's a lot of issues there, but I see them being sorted relatively fast, and I definitely think we're getting towards a stage where the limitations are much less of an issue than they are now.
Absolutely agree. I mean, for me, a lot of the hardware challenges are really about quality. And I think that's not only to do with the quality of the headset, the optics, the panel that's in it, but it's also to do with what is driving that headset, I guess. Cecile, you have worked for HP, you have a headset. Where do you think the bottleneck?
Yeah, so I will not take the HP perspective. I'd rather take our customers' perspective, because so I'm working for commercial environment, so B2B, and we see more and more of our traditional customer asking and willing to do VR or XR, and the limitation they have. The first thing is that they want to do VR or XR, but they don't really know how, with what hardware and software. So the first level, the pain point for the moment, or the challenge, is that they are looking for consultancy. It's not like selling a PC. It's really having solution approach, end-to-end approach. So the first really demand from our customer is consultancy and support to build their solution. And then I will resonate to what was said previously when you talk about the hardware. It's really looking from something easy to install and deploy, probably lighter, providing the best immersion, so having free motion, untethered, light HMDs, and then other aspects. When you are in a professional environment, it's also about security of software. As you mentioned, VR and XR are in the infancy, and they started in the gaming world. So most of the software, the clouds, the application, app stores, etc., they are coming from gaming, and a lot of professional users are looking for more secured environment. So it's another aspect, looking for secure apps, how do I secure my data, etc. Yes, that's basically it. And the last one is about going to more realistic, high resolution content.
Well, I guess it's in the B2B space, because it is controlled hardware and controlled environments, that cost can be, it's still a prohibitive thing. We have to make sure that the hardware is the right price, but it's not quite the same as the kind of consumer market, which is absolutely driven by the price of device more than visual fidelity for what you're going to view. Simon, what do you think? You've been on both sides of the fence between obviously doing a lot of consultancy now, and then also being on the consumer facing peer at Sony.
Yeah, so I think, again, the main point I'd go in terms of hardware limitations at the moment, a lot of people have mentioned accessibility, but I think in addition to the points raised already, I think the 12+ age restriction that tends to be common across the hardware is clearly a barrier. You tend to find that people want to do something like use VR headsets in a certain way or AR headsets in a certain way, then suddenly find out, actually I'm excluding this portion of the user base, and that can be quite difficult. I think, seeing that relaxed in the future, which I think will get better. I think there's a lot of corporate responsibility associated with that age choice, making sure people don't, run around and all this kind of stuff, and getting some confidence in how people are going to use the tech before they start relaxing that. So I think that'll be a big change when that changes longer term, and we get, more of our groups of people included. And also I think the inclusion aspect of it as well, like when you see someone using a VR headset or an AR headset and you have no idea what they're actually doing, it's quite a segregating thing, and really limiting there. But obviously we're seeing people now doing social screens and other technologies to support this, so you get some indication of what people are doing in virtual reality or augmented reality, and I think that really helps to get more people interested in the technology as well. But also when it comes to the hardware itself, resolution, I think, and field of view and optics, the whole visual side of things on VR headsets, I think we're very pleased that we have fantastic quality displays, and the image quality, as you mentioned before, the quality is an important factor, and I think display quality is brilliant because we're using real state-of-the-art technologies there for the image quality, so we're getting good color reproduction and things like that. Whereas if you look at the mixed reality headsets, they're obviously using different types of tech, and that's earlier, so they've got, they're a little bit behind on that side of things compared to where VR is currently. But I think the bigger challenges are things like optics. It's a really difficult area, trying to make a low profile headset that can actually have the images as all around us and as much field of view as it can possibly achieve. And also, as soon as you get into spreading this display resolution across our field of view, we end up reducing it. So then you need even more resolution. And I think when you look at content at the moment, you see that really content is limited from different perspectives. I think the limited field of view makes it difficult for us to play certain types of experiences where peripheral view is important, like you're doing a shooting game or something like that where you're being hunted. You need your peripheral view for situational awareness. But if you're doing something that involves interacting with intricate things, maybe working on a desk in front of you and picking up a piece of paper, wanting to read them, then the resolution is the important thing. And you want to be able to see clearly like you do in the real world and read small print instead of having these huge sort of Fisher-Price notes and things in the world that make everything look a bit childlike because you've got to have super large text just because of the resolution display of the display. I think that whole area is just going to get better with time, obviously, when we get more compute power and more resolution and better optics, basically. So they're the main areas that I see in terms of the hardware limitations at the moment.
Well, the main thing is, well, it's been true forever, but games and gaming has always pushed the hardware to the absolute limits. I don't know any gamer that hasn't wanted to put a better graphics card in their machine to make it run faster. And now with the addition of, two screens and 3 to 4K per eye, and then running at 90 frames a second, we're squeezing every ounce out of it. And some of the techniques that we used to be doing to make computer games in the late 90s, early 2000s seems to have come back round again and usable. But there is definitely a difference between enterprise and entertainment content. Enterprise seems to be able to have more horsepower, and they're always very, very held up on visual fidelity and photorealism. But when it comes to gaming, I've really seen and the landscape specifically, that stylized games within virtual reality work incredibly well because they play to the power of the technology, but also allow you to kind of distribute widely. Patrick, do you want to talk a little bit about Shooty Fruity? And specifically, you picked a really cool style. It must be slightly to do with the ability of the devices, right?
It's totally to do with that, absolutely, yeah. So I think, when you're creating a game, the single most important element is the gameplay, is the user experience. Is it fun? Is it using VR properly? Is it using motion control if you've got them? Is it using the fact that you can lean in and out and look around and do all the fantastic stuff that VR allows you to do? Actually using the fact that you can turn your head. So for us, that's the core. Less important is whether it's photorealistic or not. And for Shooty Fruity, given the headsets we're trying to hit, we decided to go with this kind of 1960s cel-shaded look, which actually fit the story and the game pretty well, but meant that we could do more, we could draw more, we could have more objects on screen, and we could run it very comfortably at a frame rate. Having said that, we are I can't say much about it, but we are working on a title at the moment which is fairly photoreal, and we've seen companies like Epic with Fortnite, the quality of visuals they're getting on even mobile devices, which are not a massive way behind what you're seeing on console. It gives you an idea of what you can do if you're smart. So we're seeing the visuals of the games we're creating become more and more photorealistic on VR. Of course, we want to get there. Of course, we want to be doing games that look absolutely stunning, and it's getting better and easier all the time as the headsets get better. But as I said, the gameplay has got to come first, and then pick your graphic style if you can to fit what you want to do.
Absolutely. I mean, and that also defines into kind of the two main camps. There's the mobile powered devices, and a lot of them becoming switched off and standalone. And then there's the tethered, or at least tethered to a machine within your room through a wireless transmitter, which gives you the power of a desktop machine to to move it along. Just in general, for anyone listening in on out there, we'll be able to take questions through the chat window on the right hand side. So if you throw any questions in there, the organizers will collect them, curate them, and send them in. In fact, we had one from a developer already, which is they say that the three main issues with the hardware, just to round it off, is ergonomics for the HMD, wired versus wireless, and whether it's having to plug into a high-end PC or not. And that question is, what near-term solutions do we see solving these problems between the three main areas, between ergonomics, wired versus wireless, and then high-end PC versus mobile? Has anyone got a point of view on those three?
Yeah, certainly. I'll jump in on some of that. The ergonomic side, I think, is typically what we found when we were developing PlayStation VR was that what you're trying to do is create basically a new piece of wearable technology that doesn't really conform to many other things in the world. You've got to line up people's ears with the headphones. You've got to line up people's eyes very precisely for the optics. You've got to make a device, because it's a consumer device, that fits any head size in the world. All these things are huge challenges, and I think we really were surprised at just how challenging that whole area was. The technology to deliver an image almost instantly to your eyes from a computer and be perfect and all the rest of it, we thought was going to be the hardest bit, but actually ergonomics was by far the hardest bit. And we were very pleased with where we ended up with PlayStation VR. I think it's done a great job and done really well in the marketplace, and that's probably testament to its ergonomics. But that was effectively a first generation ergonomics. And I think what we're seeing now is people are learning a lot more about what is important from this space of this new piece of wearable tech, and over time it will just get better. We'll learn, and people inherit the best practices from other devices and stuff like that, with the usual way that this thing works in the real world. And I think things just get better. So I think the ergonomics, I think we'll just see constant improvements in that space and people learning and understanding that. So I think that's not a big risk there, really. I think that's just a time thing and an experience thing. And I think when it comes to the quality of images, obviously you look to things like 5G on the horizon, all this kind of stuff, where we can go mobile and then deliver huge quantities of data very, very quickly. I mean, I was looking at the speeds, touted around for 5G, and it's faster than loading from SSDs from your computer. That's the sort of speed we're looking at. So you think suddenly everything's faster than loading things off your hard drive to stream or to download immediately to a headset. And I think that's going to enable us to get a lot more fidelity of graphics and things like that onto headsets as well.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's people banded around quite often, but I do think the enabling of off-device compute, so cloud rendering and sending the screen back to your device and then sending your movement and controls back around again. So the idea of a remote desktop, but for VR, is in our future at some point. There's some physics to get past to get the latency of the round trip to happen, but all those things can be solved.
And I think that latency issue, I think what we'll probably see is some sort of hybrid whereby, a proportion of it is done on the cloud and then delivered to the device, and the device does something at the end, almost the equivalent of where we think about streaming video at the moment, where we think, it streams me an MPEG stream and I have to have some hardware to decode the MPEG to make it visible on my device, but that's like a low-cost local function. And I can see the same sort of thing for VR, where we have a low-cost local function that maybe takes, an image that's been delivered to our headset for 3D viewing that's slightly oversized, and allows that last little bit of correction for where our head has moved to from when we moved, when we requested the video update. It allows us some degree of modification to that so that it can still be accurate. And I think that's probably what we'll see. There's some level of local hardware that'll do the last bit fix up to make sure we still get really, really low latency virtual reality. That's where the magic happens, I think, when you get that latency really, really low.
We're certainly very excited about 5G. Been tracking what's going on, and some of the tests that have happened, the latency seem to be sub 5 milliseconds, which is phenomenally good. And it seems like, if you look at the rumours, the gaming console without VR is heading towards cloud gaming, very quickly. Obviously, PlayStation will be doing a little bit with PlayStation Now, but it does seem like the next generation consoles may well head in that direction. And with 5G, VR finally, would be able to do that. And the advantage of rendering stuff in the cloud, on the edge of the cloud networks, is that you can have very lightweight devices. You don't have to have huge battery life and huge CPUs and GPUs running and getting hot and inside the headset. So I think that will be a big enabler of very lightweight glasses and getting the form factor down. So that's a really exciting development, I think.
Excellent. I mean, some more questions coming. I'll read them in a second. So just dropping through our 4 key topics. So how are manufacturing addressing user experience challenges? I think we've covered off a couple of them there, the wire, the tethered, and everything else. But is there any specific UX challenges that we think should be solved first, and kind of an order of that? This thing needs to be got better for us to really enable it. And I think the two slants is within enterprise as one look, and within entertainment as another look. I think the two markets do obviously share hardware and production skills, but they really have slightly different UX challenges. I think, Cecile, you spoke earlier about the real issue around enterprise client security, and also IT infrastructure and IT teams being pushing back on technology often.
Yeah, I think it's important to consider also the enterprise usage of VR, which is actually booming. We see that clearly as a major revolution of the way the industry are doing business. It's impacting all their workflows. So it started clearly in gaming. So and gaming may have their proper solutions for the future and proper challenges. Industry, we foresee that becoming bigger than gaming usage. So that's why we more focus on industry challenges. Clearly, the question on wire or wireless is the big one. Is one main question. As of today, if you ask us what do you recommend, we recommend to stick with the wired solution. So having some backpack solution when you can remove or get rid of this cabling, etc., and be more immersed. Potentially, as mentioned Simon, when the 5G would be there, we would be able to go to a wireless solution and all-in-one wireless solution with remote graphics, or all-in-one HMDs. But for the moment, we clearly think that backpack is a good intermediate solution until the next generation is here. About ergonomics, I think really what matters for industry is to make something easy to deploy and easy to install and to move. So we see the Windows mixed reality type of headset growing because they are more ergonomics and easy for the users. And security, so on the other way, you may have seen that the HTC Vive Pro is coming with enterprise advantages, where they start having dedicated stores, dedicated clouds that are secured, etc. So we are moving from the infancy and the gaming funny things to a more professional usage of VR with all the assets. So clearly 5G will come, but for the moment it's pretty early, I would say.
I guess it's about as well about reducing friction, and we've definitely noticed that ourselves, is that the user experience needs to be as frictionless as possible, and it's very difficult for new technology which is a completely paradigm shift, to be friction free, because the first time people use VR they have to relearn everything and from the ground up. And there are some common languages that we're all developing over the last 5 years, people beginning to understand. And once you use VR, you get better and better and better within using in the space. For me, the key one that we've managed to solve in the entertainment space is obviously with the mobile devices, is that they are very friction free. There is no booting up of another machine, there's no wires, no nothing. But we are then completely muted to the power of a mobile device. Patrick, you mentioned about. Sorry. You go
Well,
for
just one
Cecilia.
thing, another thing, so no big trend we see, which because of the price, maybe limited to enterprises, the high resolution type of headset. We go 5K, we have eye tracking solution or having biometrics. So adding lots of turning these HMDs as more than just a simple headset, having more information coming out of it. To put some at the end, having a mix of AI in the VR.
Just missing one more. We need to say blockchain, and then we've got them all. AI, immersive, 5G, blockchain enabled.
We didn't say blockchain. Let me try to find something with blockchain. I'm not sure I can get it, but yeah.
But within the mobile headset, I know, Patrick, you mentioned about the Quest being something to turn your attention to. Is that purely because of the price point for consumers, or is there any other underlying thought process around that? Patrick, are you still with us?
Sorry, Sol. Can you hear me? Sorry, I had my mute on. Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just mentioning you mentioned about looking at Oculus Quest, so obviously one of the future standalone devices. Is that what is the rationale and thinking behind that? Is that because of cost, price, and reach for consumers, or is there something else underlying that's driving you?
I think that Oculus are trying to appeal to lots of different types of consumers. You've got the Go, which is, I think, primarily being used as sort of video, and it is a really accessible device. You've got at the high end the Rift, and I think with the Go, we sort of feel like the Quest is a bit like the Switch. Actually, it's an easier to use, cheaper, incredibly ideal VR headset for playing games and doing entertainment that doesn't have all the hassle of having to set up with a PC and connect up wires and set up cameras and all the other stuff you get with some of the high-end headsets. So I think it's a really interesting new area, and excites us a lot, actually. And there's the Quest and obviously Vive Focus and other headsets, I think, coming that basically they're just so easy. You just charge them up, stick them on, and they just work, and they're there. And the ability to be wireless and to wander around whilst doing proper 6 degrees of freedom tracking inside out with hand motion control as well is really special. So I think I'm really excited by that particular form factor. For us, that's the way that we think headsets are generally moving, is towards a sort of standalone, does everything inside the headset. And when those headsets are less than $200 and they're the power of a high-end PC or better, or they're doing some cloud rendering, that's when this gets an incredibly exciting space, I think.
Excellent. Another question that just came in, just specifically about user experience, then we'll get on to content. Question says, what about locomotion? Is there any solutions available, and which ones do we think really shines in virtual reality? So moving around in VR. Simon, maybe? Do you want to?
Yeah, so I think it's actually a good lead into my answer to the previous question, actually, which is about how manufacturers are addressing user experience. One thing I think is really key is sensing. It's the headset's awareness of the rest of the world, including yourself, is absolutely key. And initially, when you think about the first headsets, we had external tracking solutions that were monitoring where your head was and where your controllers were, and that's all they had. Obviously the mobile ones typically had no real awareness of exactly where the controller was. They just used sort of 3D off, and it was more angular. But I think now we're starting to see world space tracking, where the headset's fully aware of the environment around it. And you look at Magic Leap, and it suddenly brings in hands, understands what our hands are doing and what our gestures are, and understands a lot more about the world. So it can actually help in loads of ways in terms of safety and things like that. But also going further, being able to look down and see your own body. Because I think when it comes to user experience, the whole idea really is that we're trying to convince somebody that they're physically at a new location, have this sense of presence, as we refer to it. And I think it's key to do that is to make them believe that they are actually there. And I think when you've just got your head and 2 controller points in the world, that's a real limitation. And you often get people playing games where they really like that idea, and they can move their hands around and then look down at the feet and lift the feet up and nothing happens. And we're seeing a lot of people, when it comes to locomotion, obviously going down the route of teleportation, which I think is brilliant because it's very comfortable and all the rest of it. Then we're seeing also a lot of investment into significant hardware, where you're looking at £500, £1,000 for some sort of treadmill thing that you'd have to install in a huge room in your house. And I think, they have their place, particularly in industry and training and things like that. But I think when you're looking at consumer use, that puts it out of the reach for a lot of people. But again, I think the more sensing the headset has about what's going on around it, the more chance we've got of making good use of different forms of locomotion, more natural forms of locomotion, where maybe we don't need to pick up controllers. I can just have my hands in there and move them around, no problem, and that makes it more accessible. But the same for my feet. I could look down, see my own feet, know where they are, my legs move naturally, therefore I could walk around. And if the sensor in the headset also knows the environment, it can stop me walking into things that are going to get in my way and cause me problems. So I think really sensing is a huge enabling technology that the manufacturers are all working on to improve accessibility and also to give us new options in terms of locomotion.
I think also,
most of the... you go, Patrick.
I was going to say, we see some really interesting examples of doing locomotion. I mean, one of my favourite examples was Lone Echo, which allowed you to grab and drag yourself around in zero gravity. There's some lovely bespoke examples, but also we're seeing a general trend. I don't know if you guys agree, to sort of slow walking actually being accepted by gamers and being relatively comfortable and people happy with that. So obviously, if you're playing a game where you dash around at this, incredibly fast, and it is really uncomfortable. Where the game sets you as you're walking through environments, you're exploring, and you're not running. There seems to be quite a few games coming out like that that are doing really well and getting very well reviewed by journalists and by gamers alike. So I do wonder whether we're seeing people getting used to slow walking in VR, and also game design and game developers getting better at making sure that we don't do snap turns and strafing and all the other stuff that does make people feel ill.
Absolutely. I mean, there's another question just come in, which I think is a good one, about it kind of leans into it. Is that the question is that how about the impact that VR can have on educational systems and in our schools, and the access to VR for school trips or learning or training at the moment is very much in the enterprise space being doubled down on, but because schools have low budgets and their hardware are a little behind, it's very hard for them to get VR, top tier VR inside schools. What do you think we can do to help with that within the education? I truly believe that, as we know, that VR has a bigger impact. People learn and withhold information 70-80% better when using VR, and they learn it 30 to 40% quicker. So it'd be amazing to work out how do we get it back into schools.
I think just maybe one comment. I think your first comment related to the price is very accurate for schools. Today they cannot afford having a VR headset and system for all of the classroom. Potentially in the future it will become more affordable, but it can also be the way I see it can be an option for location-based entertainment to increase their ROI, so you can use a similar venue to show more teaching or learning experience for schools. So having schools visit over the week, for example, and having the location-based entertainment, more gaming version in the weekend. So you may know, probably you know pretty well, Figment in UK, they are building this business model. So clearly, as you said, learning in VR is increasing the efficiency. You learn much more better, 75% more if you do in VR rather than if you read. So it's all beneficial for schools. For the moment, because of price, I see the schools more traveling to VR venues. So it can be to museum, to LB places to learn aspects rather than having VR in the school.
And I think the education side, one of the things that convinced me most, having read the Ready Player One book, which unfortunately wasn't referenced at all in the movie. They didn't show any of the educational side at all, with the fact that everyone was going to school and having all their education done in virtual reality, which meant, when you think about it, everyone can have access to the best teachers in the world. Every lesson's a field trip, and no one can be disruptive because you can just mute them. So it's just an absolute ideal technology for that. And I think you're right about the difficulty of getting it out there in terms of education is, at the moment when there's only a small amount of educationally focused content, it's very difficult to justify a device which is entirely given over to just the one experience. You know, it's like virtual reality headsets do virtual reality, and I think schools will probably find it hard to justify that sort of expense for something that's got at the moment a narrow scope. But I think over time that will just get better and better. I think it's a bit like when schools first had to justify putting a computer in there, and you probably had one computer shared amongst the whole school because there wasn't many educational programs, and eventually it gets to the point where every single class has them for every single pupil and things like that. So I think time will be a great healer with that. And I think, you know, I went to a few education conferences where everyone was absolutely convinced that VR will be a revolution for education. You know, totally convinced. And I think the thing is, you know, they say originally when education was all done through the written word, you know, before photography and things like that, you could only learn as well as the quality of the person who wrote that and your vocabulary. And then suddenly pictures come along. They say pictures worth 1,000 words because you can now see something and understand it without having to have it verbally described to you. But then when you've got virtual reality and you can actually be there, you know, it's like when you go on field trips and you see castles and you suddenly realize the doorways are narrow because people were much smaller at that time, and, you know, suits of armor were small because I can see that with my own eyes when I'm placed in front of them, but you don't necessarily get that out of a book. So I think the value is definitely there, and I think it's just going to be time that'll heal that, I think. But it's certainly going to be a revolution for education.
We were looking at a project last year about just to try and measure the impact of a real field trip and a cost of a real field trip to a school compared to the price of a virtual field trip, and whether the information is retained and the experience would be comparable to either of those things. And depending on the distance from the school and the impact of it, actually a set of Oculus Go's is very cost effective. And depending on what you're going to see, obviously the more interactive it is and the more heritage it is, the more you actually want to take the school there. But there is definitely a real study to happen there. And I do agree, over time, as those devices become cheaper, they'll become more and more ubiquitous within schools. So let's move on to content. Big question, where's the best content coming from? I guess we can we can split ourselves into two between enterprise content and consumer-driven content. Let's talk about enterprise first. Where's the best content? Where's the most impactful content happening, and where is it coming from?
Yeah, so for when I look at our customers, I see two different behaviors. You have some customers that want to keep it in-sourced, so they are hiring people able to code under, let's say, Unreal and Unity engine, and they create the content themselves. So that's very few of the companies that we are working with. Most of our customers, they want to outsource it, and then for the moment, because it's a booming new technology, they are working with a very large network of small content creators company. I think in Europe only we have more than 50 of those companies that are creating content. Just will take an example that always surprised me. Volkswagen, the large, I think it's the largest car vendor in the world. They are doing VR training for their operator online, and the company who created their content for VR training, it's a small, maybe they are 20 person in Munich, so it's a small startup that is 5 years old, creating content. So the content today in B2B is coming from a cloud of small companies that are usually new, that are coming, most of them from gaming, so people having skill set in gaming engine. So that's the strategy today, and what the customer are looking, it's having immersive and interactive and also multiplayer experience that they cannot create inside. So that's clearly a sign of a new technology. It's not coming from the historical player. It's coming from new guys.
Simon, any thoughts on kind of enterprise content, that stuff being created and where it's being used?
Yeah, so I think you can see quite a few key areas really that of huge interest for immersive tech at the moment. I mean, obviously medical, you go to any event that's got anything to do with medical side of things there, and there's so many companies chasing that space about amazing things that can be done with the technology. And again, I think the biggest thing really that's happened with immersive tech is once upon a time a VR headset cost you £50,000, and then probably over the course of a year or two it suddenly became £500, and there was nothing in between. There was the huge gulf where things normally work the way down slowly and, you know, give people time to get used to the tech and cost things down and all the rest of it. And this was just an explosion of opportunity to say, look, we can deploy these headsets everywhere, and everyone's playing catch up now. So, but I think, yeah, certainly in medical, we're seeing an awful lot there. People looking at different ways of doing, a lot of it's sort of training biased, which again spans many different industries, anything health and safety related, anything where you don't really want to go there because you want to train on dangerous things. VR is really popular, and any form of immersive technology is really popular in that kind of area. So I think the whole training, construction, tourism is absolutely huge, because we all know what it's like to on a headset and suddenly find ourselves somewhere. And I think so many people scout out new places to live or places to go on holiday or whatever using the internet these days and Google Maps and all the rest of it. But now you can literally fly around there in Google Earth in virtual reality and go and stand on the streets and do all that kind of thing now, which is amazing. And I mean, that's how I actually check out my own holiday locations in virtual reality now before I go. And then sometimes I think I don't need to go now. I've been. But yeah, so I think there's those industries that are huge. We're seeing a lot of traction there. Absolutely.
Yeah, in terms of the most of the use cases, we see a lot of in construction and architecture. So you can do now when you are you can visit your new or your future house virtually in VR. It can be for the large construction or the small one. So construction is also a large user for security training in the building. They can also start using VR for designing the building themselves. Training, as you mentioned, and training everywhere. So it's training how to repair a car, how to repair the helicopter. Even in HP, we use this for our training operators how to repair the printers. So,
and I think again, what people are finding with that is that because the interface is so natural, that anything you do learn in these environments translates so much more readily across to the real world. And I think that's why the training side, like you say, is really getting a huge boost from this tech because it's affordable and it's naturally, you know, quite intuitive for people to pick up and just do something with, and then actually those skills tend to be retained.
Yeah. And you mentioned ROI at some point. I mean, if you do the calculation of having people doing the helicopter repair training by VR versus sending everybody to the place where the helicopter is incomparable. So there is large saving by using VR. I think Airbus, well, they were the one using VR for years. They estimate that it's reducing by 1/3 their development costs because it's also they're reducing the number of iteration. They can do more design iteration in less time, and they reduce the number of prototyping they do typically. So it's as I mentioned at some point, it's really impacting all the workflow, and VR and design is also largely.
And the natural interface as well means that you can give the people in the tools a lot more choice. You know, it's like you mentioned about the architecture side and new homes. It's very easy to give people the choice of reconfiguring that home in front of their very eyes and, you know, refitting the colors of carpets and curtains and stuff just by pointing at things and pressing very simple interfaces. So not only is it, you know, intuitive for people to experience new things, but actually you can give them a lot more control as well because the interface is so natural and intuitive.
Yeah, I would say the most impressive thing is that since I'm working on VR, every day I'm discovering a new usage from our customers. I found out that we are a bit too much narrow-minded. We're putting things in boxes, and VR is really more out-of-the-box thinking. Just one very impressive example is that Thyssen Group, which is a German manufacturing company, they are using VR for recruitment because they have some jobs where nobody wants to go, the young people are not interested in. It's like the old technology things, and they are visiting the student forum to show how funny it is to work in Thyssen. So I never would have figured out that you can use VR for HR in the companies.
On the flip of it, I've heard of a company using VR for HR training. So for putting people in awkward situations where you need to learn to act responsibly or what to say or what not to say, especially for executive training. So the enterprise we know, and I think the biggest thing when it comes to creating enterprise content, especially that we've seen, is that it is it's got a very good value proposition because it will make you can train people quicker, you can iterate faster, you can see real efficiencies, and thus you can see a real impact to the bottom line. So you can have a budget which is reasonable to create high quality content because it will really make an impact today. Whereas the flip of it is when we get into entertainment space, we know that this year has been a pretty tough year for it's been growing, but the consumers aren't there in the floods and floods and floods that we're expecting. But there are some amazing content being created. Patrick, you live and breathe this stuff every day. What is the best sort of stuff out there, and what are you seeing the biggest impact? Obviously, Shooty Fruity, so everyone should go and download now. But what else is out there?
There's lots of great new content being made and coming next year, actually. So I think you'll see some very big groundbreaking games. What we're seeing actually is still a trend to hardware companies, the VR headset manufacturers, helping fund either big original games or sort of VR versions of big gaming IPs with existing publishers to try and help generate killer VR games to help build the market, because the market's not quite there yet to spend millions of pounds on a big game and guarantee you're going to get it back. So I think you're still going to see a little bit of funding and support from the headset manufacturers for a while for a few big games each year. It is possible to make money on VR games for consumers, but it is a tough market at the moment. You're absolutely right in what you said. What an interesting model that's coming through though is creating a consumer game and doing a bespoke version of that game for VR arcades and LBEs. It's a really location-based entertainment spaces, and that's a really nice model. I mean, you see Beat Saber is a great example. It's done very well as a consumer game, but also as in the arcades now, it's a perfect arcade game. And we're doing the same thing with Shooty Fruity, taking a game that's done pretty well for consumers and being reviewed well, and taking it into arcades and doing a bespoke, very quick, very easy to get into, very replayable game for arcades. And I think you'll see more and more game developers doing that, because what it means is you're still making the core code is 90% the same, but you're getting another bite of the cherry in terms of revenue, and particularly as there's more and more arcades opening up and a whole range of different arcades and LBEs, from very small kind of running a Vive right through to big backpack locations. You're seeing it's a really nice way for developers to try and make more money than just selling their game to consumers on the stores. So I think you'll see some really big games coming out next year, and we're certainly seeing the quality and the length of games in particular go up quite markedly. We're going to move from 2, 3, 4-hour games to 8 to 12-hour games, the kind of things that you would imagine you want to buy on a PlayStation 4 or an Xbox One. You'll see that kind of stuff coming out next year, I think.
That's great. I mean, we've got 2 other questions on coming. Very similar ones. One's talking about the recent Robert Rodriguez VR cinematic film, The Limit, has just come out. And then also another one talking about music and kind of how we distribute live events and live concerts, where we're taking in real life world, so video or volumetric. What are our opinions on that? So for me, I think that for the last 45 minutes, we've talked really about real-time engines driving our content and our experiences. We haven't really touched on the idea of capturing reality, distributing reality, and what people call cinematic VR very much. Is that because the industry is moving on, or are there any other underlying challenges that cinematic may have?
Personally, I think certainly when you look at 360 video, I mean, the 360 video is a great fit for 3DOF headsets where you can't move your head around a great deal because of the nature of the fact that when you capture something as a video, you've captured it from one perspective. And if you can only play it back from that one perspective and those two things match, then that's pretty good. That works all right. So it works well for the early 3DOF mobile headsets. But I think what we're seeing is, and we saw this ourselves with PlayStation VR, for example, that you put a 360 video on a headset where people are used to being able to move around and move their head around, and then suddenly the video doesn't have that ability to change perspective because it's captured from a single point. That becomes quite jarring for people who are used to the freedom of VR and 6DOF. To suddenly have content which has got a fixed perspective can actually have quite a negative effect on immersion. So I think that's then moved on, where we're now seeing people doing things like, Microsoft HoloCapture, for example, where you can capture a 3-dimensional person, and obviously photogrammetry being a great mechanism for capturing environments, but obviously they come with baked fixed lighting, so it means you can't do certain interactions and things very easily with them, but actually the environment's very, very strong, and then you can walk around it and look around. So I think we've seen that technology evolve really and take the essence of captured techniques to another level, and I think we'll just see more of that. I think we'll see more 3D scanning and all the rest of it to put things in our virtual environments in a way that we can start interacting with them more and walking around them and viewing them from different perspectives, and have that realism that we want. And then it all comes down then to putting a good narrative towards it, and immersive storytelling is a huge growth area that people are really figuring out really well, and taking that to whole new levels and giving us whole new experiences.
Absolutely. We just did a project where we volumetrically captured the lovely Michael Bublé and allowed him to appear in everyone's house, bar, pub or club through augmented reality, through anyone's smartphone. And I guess we haven't really talked that much about it. I think we've been hooked onto purely virtual reality, but the term XR is obviously being picked up here. I tend to talk mainly about immersive being a continuum that applies all the way from real reality through to in between. But within the augmented reality space, and then into the mixed reality space, if we're talking HoloLens and Magic Leap, what do we think the content there that's been successful over the last year is, and where do we think that's going to go in AR and MR?
Yeah, I think I like the comment you said that it's true that we mainly talk about VR actually for this first 50 minutes, and I feel it's because it's what is really booming today. What is affordable and is available is VR. So that's why most of our day-to-day is VR. Now, if I'm looking in 2 or 3 years, I think everything will move to XR and MR. That's what is more, to me, it's more natural. You have more natural interaction with the content, with your environment. So we really see the trend of everything moving to XR and VR being just a temporary